guessing that there's no public comment. I'm hoping for a second.
Welcome back from summer. Good buzz in the room. Momentous day with our new commissioner. So welcome to everybody. Just want to say for all of us on the board, very grateful to have Commissioner Agner-Trewergy here on campus, if you will. And I should say, I mentioned to the board a couple weeks ago, this is a commissioner who has most certainly hit the ground running. In some respects, she didn't really have a choice given the work stage. And the former acting commissioner sailed the ship very nicely all summer. For that, we're grateful, and a good handoff. But 3 weeks in, you would imagine this commissioner was several months in. So for that, we are indeed grateful. I will just say that it's a pleasure, and I think to frame the meeting, one of the things that I appreciate most in my conversations with Sam is that we can move from the strategy, the high level, the visioning, right back to a quick conversation about what that means for kids and families. And I think that's always what we aim to do at this board, and really appreciate that sort of movement across operations and processes. Obviously with CCDBG, there's lots of that. And at the end of the day, the work is always going to have to be about the children and families. So particularly appreciate the new commissioner's focus on some early planning, taking the time to sort of get to know the landscape and folks and think carefully about agency operations, just as has been the case over the last year or so, to better match the work. So here we are. Wonderful. Welcome.
So I'll just add my welcome. I'm actually more happy and joyful about her arrival than anyone else. I can guarantee you that. But not for myself, but for the children and families of the Commonwealth who have been apparently under my care for several months over the summer. But I do want to welcome our new commissioner here. I've had numerous conversations over the last couple of weeks with colleagues and friends in the field who have reported back to me about their early interactions with the commissioner and how pleased and thrilled they are with her amazing performance over the first 2 weeks. And my response has been that you ought to sort of lower the bar because now things can only go downhill. But actually, that's not true. I think all of us, certainly we knew this through the selection process, understand that there's just a huge upside potential here and great capacity and great skill and thoughtfulness in her approach to the work, and she's certainly demonstrated that. with a couple of very sort of quick trials by fire in the first couple of weeks. So we were glad to sort of skip over that honeymoon period and go straight into the work. But thank you for being here, and congratulations.
Great. Well, thanks to you both, and certainly as evidenced by today's agenda, certainly just the moment is now to continue and to jump into the work. So I'll turn it over to the new commissioner. Welcome again.
Thank you guys so much, and really happy to be here. And I'm going to take a little bit longer with my remarks and use this opportunity to give a little bit of an update of what the first 20 days have held. Not that I'm counting, actually 19 days. So it definitely feels like a complete blur since I sat at that chair and talked to you guys last time I was in this room. And between the process of moving to Massachusetts and getting to know the team, having an opportunity to meet with many of you, I think all of you at this point, and understand the landscape a little bit better. I've learned so much. I've learned so much about the agency, how we are implementing the new CCDBG regs, and again, really what that does for children and families on the ground, and particularly in a field that is this fragile. So I wanted to, on that note, take not credit, but have an opportunity to highlight some of the great work that happened over the summer before I got here as it relates to some of the CCDBG compliance. As many of you know, there's a huge deadline coming up at the end of September, and we are well on track, I think, at this point to meet all of the requirements for that. One of the big accomplishments over the summer was launching the learning management system, Strong Start. And as I apologize not knowing everyone's detail, I will just give the 2 seconds of background on that. That is 12 courses required by CCDBG regulations to address health and safety trainings for all staff. I wanted to highlight the team's success on that to date, as of yesterday, there are over 33,000 people in that system. Which is actually a 20% increase in the last 2 weeks. And so really on track to get to some really good metrics and have been focusing. I know the team has been out there doing road shows, being present in every region, helping people get registered and get the trainings accomplished. And so seeing some really good progress on that. About 31,000 of that is enrolled in at least one required course, which is over 95%, and almost 20,000 have completed all 12 courses, which is over 65%. So really on good success to date, being on track to accomplish this metric. So we will never hit 100% taking all the courses because not everyone is required to take all the courses. Bus drivers and people who don't have as much direct interaction with children have a smaller set of courses. So really good progress and really on track. The team has done a lot of good work on that. We have the exact number of new policies that have been written, approved, and are ready to be released is astounding. But we have the written policies for CCDBG compliance and are working on communication and release of those. And I think the team has done yeoman's work to make sure that all of that meets the requirements of the new regulations. And in addition to hiring new staff for that implementation and really been pulling everyone together to make sure that we are ready. Over the summer, there were new licensors, new monitors, new investigators hired to make sure that we are prepared to do the level of monitoring and support for the agencies that serve children and families as we roll out these comprehensive regulation changes. I also wanted to take a second to update on where some of the budget work is going. Again, entering at a very interesting time right after the budget is approved as we are developing our spending plan. Many of you may know this, but I wanted to highlight a few of the things as we articulate how we'll be allocating the budget this year in collaboration with EOE and ANF and all of the other stakeholders. I'm quickly learning the acronyms that are involved in this process. The spending plan continues the great work that the team has been doing and that this board has been leading over the last few years, maintains the funding from the preschool expansion grantees, and adds new communities for the CPPI program, the Community Preschool Partnership Initiative program. Trying to not use as many acronyms as I learned them myself. It increases supports to community colleges, aligns that work with the career pathways, as well as has an adjustment that we are working on and look forward to working on with many of you around a rate increase for providers, and supporting access for families through the CCRNRs and the Mass 211 system. So we are eager to think about and have that finalized so we can get everything out the door, but in the meantime, wanted to highlight some of the great work that you have been leading that has defined the way that we have addressed our suggested spending allocations for the upcoming year. I also want to highlight another policy that we are implementing as part of this year, and I think while not directly implemented by EEC, has tremendous impact on our field and are working with our providers to make sure that we can implement it, particularly in family child care homes in a really strategic way, and that is the paid family medical leave. I think many of you know from a national landscape, this is considered one of the most impactful policies that we can make, not only for children and families, but also for a field that is underpaid and often doesn't have access to really critical benefits. The state's leadership, the governor's leadership for the Commonwealth on that has really been really remarkable, and I think will serve to benefit the workforce, and particularly family child care homes that often have the most limited access to benefits and are caring for some of the most vulnerable children. So that's the state of the department, and I want to give a shout out to all of those who taught me quickly what most of those words meant and got me up to speed on all of the quick decisions that we had to make. I also wanted to take a second to talk a little bit about the work that I've been doing to get up to speed and to be able to make sure that I'm highlighting some of the themes that I'm learning, my reflections, and next steps as I see, particularly as it relates to board activities. So I very much started internal, really spending the first few weeks getting to know the staff, getting to know the work of the teams, and understanding the operations that are quite, as anyone who's ever worked in a bureaucracy know, can be quite elaborate, and wanting to make sure that I understood where all of the wheels turned, and who was turning them, so that as I turned externally, had a more articulate set of questions. I think that much like as I've moved externally, I think the issues here in the Commonwealth are obviously similar to the rest of the nation. We have a fragile field, a fragile workforce, pieced together funding, some of which is under EEC, but much of which also supports our programs on the ground and supplements and complements EEC's work as well on behalf of children and families. And in my first few weeks, while I tried to focus internally, I really was grappled with the realities of that fragile field as we saw the unfortunate closing of Cape Cod Child Development Center and working to address to make sure that that program, as it unfortunately had to close its doors over the next month, that we were really focusing on what children and families need on Cape Cod, and that we are and that we're really supporting a thoughtful transition despite the impact that will have on that community. We are also forced to jump into the fire of many new policies being rolled out, thinking through when you operationalize a new policy for the first time, what that means in terms of unintended consequences and what that means in terms of new understandings and what we as an agency are going to do about that. I've met with all 5 regional offices. I have sat in numerous team meetings, and again, shout out to all of the teams that have let me ask numerous questions in each one of those team meetings, getting to know the operations and begun conversations about what really drives me in the work as I've introduced myself to the team throughout the state. Really focusing on how I define quality, access, data-driven or evidence-based decision-making, and have really robust conversations with the staff about what that means for our work and how we document evidence around impact on children and families. As I've started to move externally, I was welcomed graciously into the early childhood field with a reception last week, and thanks to those of you who helped plan that and attended so I could get to know the many faces. I promise you I will not remember the many names right off the bat, so thank you also in advance for every time I say, what was your name again? And really getting to a better understanding of the nuances and challenges that while face the nation are specific to the Commonwealth. I wanted to just end with a couple reflections on what I'm seeing both internally and externally, and where I'm hoping the next steps of our work together can really focus. I see that while there is a ton of work going on, that there's room for us to build benchmarks and metrics that will measure the impact we're having in the field, and allow us to understand some of the innovation that we are driving for the Commonwealth at the systems level on those specific levers that we want to target to be part of the solution of the childcare crisis that is confronting the United States. I also think that there's an opportunity for us as a department and in conjunction with the board to think about the specific relationship between the central office and the field offices, and where we might be able to think about the proximity to the services to the communities that we are aiming to serve. And I think that through those two initiatives, as we think about how the department is shaped, I hope that we can also articulate the ways that EEC can be a leader in driving not only the innovation, but also the solutions that will hopefully help this country and the children and families, the most vulnerable children and families, by improving systems that support them on the ground. I'm hoping that over the next couple of months, we have a chance to talk through strategic planning. We're quickly looking at designing a process that will really engage not only the board and the staff, but also the larger community to help align around those levers that we want to publicly track and the outcomes that we think can be most impactful in moving and improving the stability of the field as a whole. I'm hoping that also comes with an opportunity around looking at our own department structure, aligning ourselves as we define the work that we are intending to impact, and then also help fill some of the gaps we see with specific staffing increases. I also just want to take a moment. She is not here, but because she did not have an opportunity to be, hopefully she's listening somewhere in Colorado, we did not have a moment to say goodbye to her at an official board meeting. Is that Anita Mueller, who was not only the internal point person during as the acting commissioner, played his acting role. She helped really support the staff through the transition, and also has been a dedicated member of the EEC team for over 15 years. Her leadership will be sorely missed at EEC, and she has been an incredible support to me through this, despite the fact that we only overlapped officially for a couple weeks. She has been a constant thought partner. That position leaves obviously a big gap in our organization. I wanted to assure everyone that in the meantime, I'm getting to know her team, and her direct reports will report to me in the interim. But as we really think about the opportunity to look at the overall organizational structure, and as some of her work moves from conceptualization to operationalization, what does that look like for what we need to build at the field offices and in central office? That, coupled with the open COO position that was designed before I got here, or I think the title shifts, but that open senior position will be part of the really robust thought process we'll be doing about how we need to organize ourselves to get the work done and make the most impact we can for children and families. So I just wanted to address all of those concerns, and also to give the shout out to Anita, who did leave a couple weeks ago, but it has not started her new job yet. So I'm sure she's not sitting at a computer waiting, but for all of her thoughtful work. So I will conclude. I thank you for the time to be able to spend a little more time and let you know of my reflections to date.
Thank you. Questions or comments for the new commissioner? I know.
That's a profound comment. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for demonstrating your tremendous commitment already.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want us to turn our names to?
I can say now that I've met with you all personally, it's much easier to remember names.
That's great. Well, like I said, it's clear, as you can see, Commissioner has hit the ground running. We do really appreciate it. We also did wish Anita a fond farewell, but not too far from us, and also having a real impact likely to come through her work at UTEC in spaces that really do relate in many ways to the mission of EEC's work. So that's exciting. It's a very strong organization. They will be much stronger for Anita's presence as well. We have some statements from the public, not surprisingly, which is great. We'll aim for 3 minutes a person. We have Sheila Seinelin from Boston Outdoor Preschool Network. Would you like to make a few comments? On deck, we have Carol Rubin from Parent Child Plus. Hi.
Hello. Good afternoon. Hello.
Welcome.
So my name is Sarah Bessie.
And I'm Shayla Sinelian.
Shayla, I'm sorry.
And I'm
Shayla.
Sarah Murray.
Yep. And we're from Boston Outdoor Preschool Network, or BOPN for short. And we're located outdoors in the Arnold Arboretum. And yeah, we're here today to share our enthusiasm for nature immersive outdoor programs for children in Massachusetts in general and our program specifically. And as you may know, there is a growing movement to connect children with nature. Our passion for nature play is based on research showing the cognitive, social, and emotional benefits of frequent play in natural settings. Programs like ours originated in Europe in the 1960s and are widespread there. The largest outdoor preschool in the United States is called Tiny Trees and is located in Seattle, Washington. Tiny Trees has outdoor classrooms in 9 parks in Seattle and has an enrollment of 315 children. In 2017, the Washington legislature decided to create a whole separate set of regulations specifically tailored for outdoor early childhood programs. Please consider adopting a similar framework for Massachusetts. Within Massachusetts, our mentors are the founders of Grow, Bloom, and Thrive, Sprouts Farm and Forest Kindergarten in Millis, Massachusetts. And they were the first program of their kind to become licensed in Massachusetts, and we are following their example. Within Massachusetts, we have also been in touch with Wildwood Learning Center, the Boston Nature Center, Drumlin Farm, and Marahawk. All of the nature-based programs we've talked with in Massachusetts have waiting lists. Shayla, Sarah, and I have been working on launching BOPN since the winter, and the families we have enrolled are looking forward to our opening day. We are very thankful to all of the people in the EEC within our region who share our belief in the value of nature immersion and play. We have many friends who are experts in the field of nature-based education, and we would be happy to connect you with them. We look forward to continuing our collaborative relationship, and we look forward to our opening day. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck. Sounds great.
Yeah, don't leave.
Sure.
It does sound fabulous. It really does sound interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. Can you tell us what some of the big picture regulations might be that you're asking us to consider?
Yeah, so I actually gave a copy to Commissioner Agner-Triwergi, and there's actually 2 copies floating around somewhere. I'm happy to make more copies or send you the link, but it's a comprehensive.
The 2 big takeaways, like the types of regulations.
Oh, just kind of everything. Culturally, forest kindergartens are just a new concept. Okay, there's 2 movements. There's nature preschools and then there's forest kindergartens. So forest kindergartens have their roots in Europe and were imported, basically, rather recently. The first one being Aaron Kenny School on Vashon Island, Washington, about 10 years ago. And then there's nature preschools, which came out of the nature center movement. So that's more of like a uniquely American movement. So we have like a lot of nature center preschools located at nature centers, but we have fewer forest kindergartens, and they're very related movements. There's a book called Forest Kindergartens and Nature Preschools by David Sobel, who's in Antioch, and he's a leader in the field. And so, yeah, those regulations in Washington, they deal with things like emergency shelters, for example. Like, we're using the Arboretum building as our emergency shelter, but that might seem a little bit odd in the context of the current regulations.
Okay, I just wanted the big picture. Thank you. It'll be interesting to see how it rolls out and what you can bring to our discussion about what children should know and be able to do also in that context. So thank you.
Thank you.
Carol Rubin with Pam Bonfigliori on deck. I don't know if I got that. Oh, coming together. Got it.
Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to the Commissioner. I'm Carol Rubin, the State Director for Parent Child Plus. You may not recognize our new name. We were formerly known as the Parent Child Home Program, but during the past 50 years, we've grown and developed, and it was time for a new name to capture the range of activities and programs that we offer. Equal possibilities from the start, using education to break the cycle of poverty for low-income families. We envision a world where every child enters school ready to succeed because every parent has the knowledge, skills, and resources to build school readiness where it starts, the home. So we continue to be a home visiting program working with children between the ages of 16 months and 4 years of age and their families. In addition to our core model, we are also conducting home visits with family child care providers. This new FCC work is being implemented in 8 states, including Massachusetts, and engages the provider, the children in her care, as well as their parents in the learning process. Our new website is parentchildplus.org. It has lots of interesting information, including published research reports and news articles, and a great new video that I encourage you to watch. It's the beginning of the school year, and I'm happy to report that all 37 Massachusetts sites, covering 170 cities and towns, including half of the gateway cities, are back to work. Home visits, parent-child play groups, and parent education programs have begun for the over 1,000 Massachusetts families we are working with. 83% of the children are not engaged in any other early childhood programming, and 67% of their parents were born outside of the country. I want to thank EEC for your ongoing support, and especially EEC staff and Gail DeRiggi for expediting our expansion grant and working hard to get the money out to children and families. And I'm delighted now that Pam Bonfilio
She's been practicing.
there are multiple ways that come to mind has been able to take time out from her work in Quincy to tell us specifically about Parent Child Plus in Quincy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Carol, and thank you, everyone else. Good afternoon. I'll just repeat it. My name is Pamela Bonfioli, and I've been the City of Quincy's Commission on the Family Parent Child Plus Program Coordinator for over 6 years. In the past, in my other life, I've worked with Food and Nutrition Service, the Domestic Feeding Assistance Program Agency of USDA. I've been active in all the various PTOs. I was a volunteer for many years for the Parent-to-Parent program in Quincy, and lots of others, but we won't go on. So the Parent Child Plus program has actually been operating in Quincy for over 19 years. I'm pleased to meet with you all today and to give you a little glimpse of how we're servicing the families in Quincy. My office works with the Coordinated Family and Community Engagement Grantee Office. Isn't that nice that I didn't say CFCE, right? Like I really do know what it means? Okay. Which in Quincy is the Quincy Community Action Program. We like to call it QCAP. We also were lucky to receive funds from private grant foundations. Thank you, Carol. Together with all that, I'm happy to report that Quincy has been able to service 29 families over the 2019-20 program years. Really excited. My staff, I have 4 fabulous home visitors. Out of the 4, 3 of them are able to service families using 3 different dialects of Chinese. And out of my 4, 3 are former program participants, which is really big, really something we're proud of. We're blessed to perform our home visits using Cantonese, Mandarin, and Taiwanese. Taiwanese can also be pronounced as Toijanese, depending if you're speaking with a Mandarin dialect or a Toijanese dialect. Just as an aside, a significant number of our recent newcomers, Chinese newcomers to Quincy, come from a city called Taishan, and that is in the province of Guangdong. How about that? My home visitors would be so proud of me. While it might sound confusing, what I really wanted to convey to you all is that because of the richness of my home visitors, the fact they all are from the community, they know the community, and that they can speak such a variety of dialects, we're able to communicate to our families, the people in our community, the service providers, really communicate, like not just a little bit, but really get in there. And we are conducting meaningful parent-child plus home visits. We're providing referrals about community services, events, family fun activities, the whole gamut. And currently, with the current caseload, we have the Asian families represent about 70% of our caseload. So that gives you a number there. We look forward to continuing the Parent-Child Plus program in Quincy and servicing our families. And I really thank each and every one of you for your support. Thank you. Oh, and I do have some pictures to share. She has some words. She has data. I have pictures, and the pictures are of happiness. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello. Hope you all had a great summer. Hi, I'm William Eddy. I'm the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Association of Early Education and Care, often referred to as MATCA. And on behalf of our 600 centers across the state who collectively provide the majority of care purchased by the department, I'm here to testify on behalf of them on the issues of background record checks and also talk a little bit about EEC finances. But before I do that, I'd like to preface my remarks and say on behalf of our providers, a warm welcome to our new commissioner. We've had a chance to interact with her over the last few weeks, and we look forward to working with you on our shared goals of having stable programs that provide high-quality care for children and family in the state, and I'm confident that you're going to do a fantastic job. So I welcome you on their behalf. I'm here today to talk a little bit about background record checks, which I know is on your agenda, but I think with a different agenda than maybe what you're about to get from the department. The department, I'm sure, wants to talk to you about the process of the systems now being in place in the next couple of weeks so that you can implement the background record checks. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what's been going on over the past year as the governor's legislation for this went through the legislature, and now as you're about to begin full usage of the new background record check system. We have grave concerns about where this is going. And we've offered these now consistently over the year. We have hundreds of early educators that are in our programs on discretionary reviews. This is nothing new. I mean, the previous commissioner talked often about 15% of our employees being hired on discretionary reviews. Accurate number, but it's an accurate number for the entire state. When you look at the subsidized system, and I don't think anyone would argue that the workforce pool is not the same. You know, I often use the example of look at community daycare in Lawrence, which one of your board members, has a long affinity with. They're 3 miles from Bright Horizons Brookside in Andover. Those 3 miles might as well be a world difference for the children and families they serve and the workforce pool that they interview and hire. They are not the same. And the percentage of our employees that are hired on discretionary, reality time here, is much higher than 15%. We have hundreds of employees who are going to be coming up for annual reviews. Folks, you've just got the first lawsuit all over the globe. Inevitable, many more to come. It's an overreach by this administration that you are looking at juvenile records. It is an overreach by this administration that you are looking at cases that are continued to out findings. It is an overreach by this administration that you are looking at civil DCF charges. Providers want to work with this department. Providers want to work with this administration. We don't love giving quotes to the globe that question where the heck you're going on overreach. But this is going to be in court, and there's going to be plenty of our employees that are about to get banned for life. You've just seen the first one. You're going back and looking at things that they've already been working. They've been working in our program, some of these people, employees, for decades. They have employee performance reviews that say good performance employee reviews. You're not asking the employer, why did you hire in the first place? You're not asking to look at performance reviews. Folks, the provider community wants to work with you on this. I urge you as a board, as a department, to take them up on the offer and work with providers on this. There are limits as to what you can work with us on with the federal law, with new hires. But you can certainly ask the providers for background information about why did we hire. You can certainly ask the background of what their performance reviews are. But having what's going on right now on a limited basis and is about to go on a large-scale basis is just wrong. And we look forward to working with you on it. A second issue, which I want to just briefly touch on, equally probably as favorable as the first one with you folks, is surplus again. $25.8 million that's in front of you today during the finance report. That follows last year's $23 million surplus, which you got 18 back for. That follows the year before the embarrassing total that was near $50 million, which the governor stepped in, thankfully, in April and May and used it to pay for rate increases. $25.8 million again. We have contract slots sitting open all over the state. You know, at what point do we simply stop spending money on where it was intended and then have to ask the legislature to once again step in and pay for really good programs? No one's arguing what's in the request before the legislature on grandparent care, on short-term DCF care, on paying for the non-compliance rate increase. No one argues the priorities. These are priorities that should be in the governor's budget. But at what point do we continue to fund these through the non-spending of funds and then hoping the legislature will give it back to us? So we just want you to know it's something we think you should be paying attention to. We'd like to work with you on this, as always. So this is my happy news of the day. I know you were looking forward to that. I thank you all, as always, I always do. I thank you for your volunteer service on this board. The work you do is remarkable for children and families in this Commonwealth. And I appreciate you letting me come before you today.
Thank you, Bill. I just have a quick follow-up question for you on the BRC issues that you're raising. Do you have even a sort of back-of-the-envelope sense of what proportion of the workforce that you're talking about are facing mandatory disqualifications under current regulations and law versus those that are facing discretionary disqualification?
We've never used the mandatory because we assume the federal mandatory, straightforward, clear cases of if you've been convicted of these certain charges, it's straightforward. We've never even looked at that because we've said, we agree with the department, we agree with the law. We're all in favor. They should be mandatorily disqualified. The discretionary figure is EEC's figure. EEC has used the 15% statewide average. We have argued, Sharon Scott Chandler passionately up in the legislature has argued that urban programs are almost double that on discretionary reviews, somewhere around the 25 to 28, somewhere around there. That, you know, that's a figure the department could get far better than I could, but that's what we're hearing from programs as we ask them in the public arena that are in urban areas what their number is. Those are the ones I think that are most vulnerable because those are the folks, Joan, that are working in the programs.
I get that.
And that are going to be looking, the department's going to be looking at with annual reviews.
Okay, that's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. And certainly I'm flagging this to take up at another time. I think the other point that I sort of took and I think is up for further discussion is sort of to what extent we have performance reviews as a way and thinking about performance reviews at scale and reasons for hire. So I'm just thinking about implementation as well. But I think I'm certainly flagging that as something follow-up discussion. Peter, welcome.
Thanks. Always a pleasure to follow Bill. Thanks for softening the room, Bill. I'm Peter Dolliver. I have the privilege of being the CEO for the Alliance of Mass YMCAs, and on behalf of our 28 associations with their 81 branches and over 900 locations, welcome, Commissioner. Very happy to have you here. Look forward to working with you. And really kind of in the vein of what's gone on so far, other than the really important issues that Bill has brought up, it's really just a little bit, take the opportunity for you to know a little bit about us. So to put it a little bit in perspective, these Ys are the largest provider of early ed and after school time collectively, along with camps in the Commonwealth. We serve roughly 3.3 million people a year, 500,000 of which are under 18, roughly 60,000 of which are in early ed or out of school time. The Ys are uniquely positioned among early ed and out of school time providers because we offer a variety of programs and wraparound services, but also the way in which those services are paid for. Most Y revenue is a mix of public subsidy dollars as well as private pay with scholarships as needed. We're also unique in that we have 22,000 employees in Massachusetts, including full and part-time, most of which are in our early education out of school time programs, and a number, of course, are in our health and wellness and our membership and related divisions. This is to say the Y as an organization often has a distinct viewpoint regarding changes in the field. We look forward to sharing that viewpoint and working on those changes in a professional development of QRAS, background checks, the rate reimbursement formula, and anything else that EEC is working on. We're happy to welcome the Commissioner to Massachusetts and to continue partnering with the board and the staff of the department to serve children of the state.
Thanks,
I'm sure
Peter.
there are no questions on that whatsoever.
Last but not least, we have Anthony, and I'm not sure I'm going to attempt this last name because I can't see it very well. That could be on my side. From the Boys and Girls Clubs.
I thought that was just the sign-in sheet to come in.
Oh, okay. But go ahead, take
But
the
I
floor.
may as well introduce myself and say hello to the Commissioner. Congratulations on your new role. My name is Anthony Abdel. I had my firm Venturi Associates has represented the Mass Alliance of Boys and Girls Clubs now since its formation over a decade ago. We represent 40 clubs in over 80 communities across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and serve about 170,000 kids annually each year. Just to reflect what Peter said, we look forward to working with the new commissioner on a number of issues, youth policy issues. We hope to get into to talk with you soon on some things that are of critical importance to our kids and our communities. And we thank you and congratulate you on your new appointment.
Nice pitch right off the bat. Let's move now to routine business. We have minutes from what feels like a long, long time ago, June 19th, 2019. Final meeting before summer recess. Any amendments or corrections? Looked fine to me. Good? All right, all in favor of the minutes as typed here?
Aye.
Abstained or abstained? Opposed? Great, approved minutes of June 2019. Dave, thank you for picking up on fiscal, which is, go right ahead. I know you met this morning.
Yeah, fiscal and oversight. Committee met this morning. Just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview. We looked really at a couple of things. One are our closeout financials and caseload numbers and wait list for FY19, and spent some time talking with the department a little bit about the projected financials and caseload numbers for FY 2020, and we'll continue to work with them at our October meeting in particular to take a look at what our numbers look like. July sometimes isn't the best predictor of caseloads. Those tend to clear up a little bit more as you get into August and September, but we're comfortable with what we heard and are confident the department has a good handle on those things that they need to do, both from a financial perspective as well as a caseload perspective.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move now to our items for discussion and action. We'll start with the BRC update, more on the process side than on the regulations side. Oh, yes, please do.
Just as we're getting set up on that, I wanted to give a little bit of context of our two discussion points for today in terms of the background record checks and the consumer education website that will be, are two critical components rolling out this month for CCDBG compliance. And wanted to, as the chairperson said, that really looking at some of our process updates, some of the things that will roll out and hit the field in terms of our operational procedures, and as well as transparency to parents and to families around what our operational procedures may mean for programs that they're applying to. So to give a little bit of context as we launch into the specific operational components that you're going to hear, this is, as was noted, a very new process. It has been an extremely large lift of operational transformation for the background record checks unit and for the way we do business in terms of the Consumer Ed website. And so I want to start by thanking the team who is about to present for all of the leadership and hard work on making this actually come to fruition. We feel like we're in a really good place, but as any new process happens, we'll continue to iterate and work with the field to make sure that we are in a continuous quality improvement process on both of the things you're about to hear as they roll out.
All right, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Lasso, Secretary Pizer, Commissioner Agner-Trewargy. Hopefully I got that right. I'm practicing. I am here again to present on BRC. Welcome back after hopefully a great summer. So I'll start off by reminding everybody what we're focused on. We have for quite some time been focused on the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act that originated in 2014. It required that all of the changes that you've been hearing about for years now be implemented. And the initial deadline for implementing all of these changes, if you recall, was back on September 30th of 2018. Now it's all coming to fruition at the end of the month, September 30th of 2019, with a few exceptions related to background record check requirements. As a reminder for CCDBG, the purposes of the law were to strengthen the requirement to protect health and safety of children in care. In particular, when you hear about background record check requirements, remember this is all about protecting children who are attending programs and ensuring that they're not exposed to individuals with bad backgrounds. Additionally, as you'll hear about from the Consumer Ed presentation, it's ensuring that families are informed and they have access to information to support child development. Additionally, the goal of CCDBG is to provide equal access to stable, high-quality childcare for low-income children, and also to ensure the quality of childcare in the early childhood workforce. So right now we are in, as a commissioner indicated during her update, we are in a great place. We just have a few loose ends that we are in the process of tying up. We are getting ready to launch the new BRC Navigator system that I'll discuss later, but then eventually we do have a requirement by September 30th of 2020 to implement some additional background check requirements. So the next slide provides you with an overview of the numbers of child care programs that are subject to CCDBG. As a reminder, residential programs and placement agencies are not subject to the CCDBG requirements. However, we have implemented a more streamlined approach to the background record check process, and within that we have been able to apply some of the important changes to residential programs and placement agencies. So you can see there the numbers and the program types. We are required under CCDBG to apply this to new program types under what we are calling funded program category, which we'll describe later. This slide provides you with an update or an overview of all of the CCDBG requirements. There are more than this, but these are the major areas that we've been working on. And as I go into my presentation, before I get there, I want to just show you all a video that outlines some of the background record check requirements, and it's actually available on our website. And thank you to Christina for pulling that up. There's just music in the background. So that video that Christina just played for us is what we designed with the Executive Office of Technology, Safety and Security, who helped pull together a really quick video for families and parents who are going online, and also educators, staff, for them to look at and understand in a quick, streamlined way what the background record check process is about. Beyond that, though, EEC, oh, sure.
Is that video, the text, is it available in multiple languages yet?
No, it is not, but that's a good flag to see if we can get it translated. So then, next I'll just kind of give you an overview of what we've done with respect to group and school age programs so far. So the group and school age programs, as you may recall, are the first group of programs that we are using for the BRC Navigator. So in 2019, in February, we started the process of bringing group and school age programs into our new BRC Navigator system. Our existing system is very broken up. It's slow, it's manual. We have a lot of staff doing manual work to mail out records and to receive information. So the BRC Navigator is an important tool for bringing all the BRC information into one place and allowing real-time reports back on suitability for programs. So in February, what we did, we allowed the we created a migration process without going into the weeds. We brought all of the information in our legacy system about who was listed as having been run for a program and brought it into our new BRC Navigator system. And then we opened up the BRC Navigator to those programs who were eligible to go in, and they had to be fully suitable before they could go in. But those programs were able to go in and look at who was run for their program and identify whether that person was either hired, not hired, or had ended employment. So that has been going on since February of 2019. Then in the summer of 2019, on August 6th, I believe is the exact date, is when we actually started the pilot group, which was huge for us. So that meant that we selected about 8 providers who had multiple programs underneath them to use the BRC Navigator to submit new candidates. And the purpose of that was to ensure that our BRC Navigator system was operating appropriately from end to end, to catch whether there were any issues or bugs within the system, and to make sure that things are flowing smoothly. So that pilot is still ongoing, and it has run really well. We have identified bugs and have been working on them since August, and we are, from there, the pilot group has been very receptive and helpful in providing feedback from a program perspective and from a candidate perspective as to how that the new BRC Navigator looks and feels. And then we are now in a great place after having run through that pilot to launch the new BRC Navigator system. I feel confident in saying that we are looking to launching that system next week. We have some communications that are planned. I know that it's been a long road, but we finally are here. And I know the commissioner, when she came in, she made a tremendous effort to make sure that we are actually operationally ready, that we have all of the pieces in place to feel confident and comfortable in going live with this new system. One of the things that will be a challenge for us within the agency is the fact that we are operating within this new BRC Navigator system, and then we're also maintaining our legacy system for the family child care, residential programs, and adoption and placement agencies. So that's really something that we had to keep in mind as we were moving forward, making sure that our BRC unit staff were broken up appropriately, have had trainings, and ensuring that the field and field operations were trained and feel comfortable with the direction they were headed.
Hi, Felicia.
Hi.
In addition to the massive undertaking that happened to reach this stage, right? Everything from working across multiple state and federal agencies to figuring out a new regulatory scheme to figuring out the technology components to moving through the procedural components of all of that to staffing up. It now sounds like, in addition, I know you've contemplated previously the need for administrative law review that also grows out of this process. But it sounds like, based on testimony that we heard earlier, that that may be a significant additional piece of work. So can you offer some feedback in terms of kind of what the status of our current capacity to handle an influx of appeals may be, and what, if any, additional needs you might foresee?
So it depends on how you characterize appeal. What I would consider an appeal on our level right now is the review process. So anybody who is in the mandatory category under federal law, we cannot offer them an appeals process other than providing them with the opportunity to correct their record. Unfortunately, with the mandatory disqualifications, our hands are tied. I recognize the commentary earlier. We do, within EEC, allow for a full review process that is outlined in our background record check regulations. It's assigned to a background record check specialist who has an obligation to review all the documentation that a candidate provides. The candidate is given an opportunity to provide a statement, to present documents, reference letters, even reference from their employer if they would like, to allow for EEC to conduct that review of the information. Under CCDBG, we are not allowed to share the background record check results with programs like we have been doing, and we confirmed with them multiple times that we are unfortunately not able to delegate that information and delegate the review to them. But I would say that we do have a very robust process where after a reviewer evaluates all the background record check information, they put it into a written rationale. It's signed off by a supervisor and an attorney, and so there is a pretty thorough process before we approve or deny an individual. If there's a family child care candidate or a licensee of a program, there is an additional appeal right to the Division of Administrative Law Appeals, where they can have an administrative hearing before a magistrate. And then from there, if the recommended decision is issued by the Division of Administrative Law Appeals magistrate, and it goes back to the commissioner, who issues a final agency decision. So we do have that appeal. It's pretty robust appeal in place. For some of the candidates, they would only get the written review process, but everyone other than the ones in the mandatory do get that opportunity to weigh in on the record and provide reasons why they believe they should be approved. And I would say, oh, sorry.
I was going to add, I think, Felicia, that one of the unknowns is how many increased appeals that we are going to have, and I just want to highlight the great work that you and the team have done in developing dashboards that will help us keep a day-to-day tracking of who. There's still a slight refinement. We were meeting this morning on them, but really making sure that we're looking at those key progress indicators that will tell us when we see an influx. This is an input that we will need, as I referenced earlier, of looking at organizational structure and where some of the capacity increases we may need. That is the data that we will be using to drive to understand where in the interim period, as Felicia highlighted, where we're using a legacy system and a new system, and as we phase out the legacy and move it into the new system, of really keeping track of what that impact is on the workload of the new process and where we might need additional staff to address that. And I think that is keenly on the radar. We don't know yet what we will see until we roll out, and then we'll be tracking data day to day.
And we've already staffed up the background record check unit this was the whole reason, to address the review process and the number of appeals through a review process that we anticipated. Okay, so I'll move on to the funded programs. So those are the programs that receive funding from EEC through a voucher or a contract, but aren't actually licensed by us. They're either license exempt or they're not subject to our licensure. This would include the public schools, private schools, and summer camps. So under CCDBG, we have to have implemented a process for these groups by September 30th of 2019. So any new hire that begins working within one of these organizations after October 1st will be subject to an EEC BRC. So we have created a process immediately to introduce the funded programs to the background record check requirements. There are a number of other requirements that we've reviewed with you on previous occasions that we will need to provide to them and announce to them, but this is an important piece that needs to start right away for any new staff after October 1st. We have designed an interim process for these entities, so there's a way that EEC will receive the information. There will be direct contact with monitors for these funded entities, and we'll be running those background record checks through our new BRC Navigator in an interim process. Eventually, the full launch of the BRC Navigator for these groups will occur in the winter of 2019. And the reason why we're doing this is because due to the fact that we have a go live for our group and school age childcare programs in September of 2019, we want to make sure that we are appropriately and thoughtfully implementing the funded programs. We didn't want to rush it, so we have an interim process to ensure compliance, and then the more thoughtful long-term solution is upcoming in the winter. So as I had mentioned previously, we have had an increase in staff within the BRC unit. I am happy to report we had our BRC manager begin his employment here in EEC, thankfully, so I could delegate some of that important work to someone else. Phil Harrison, he's now here. He started in July. And we also were able to hire 5 funded program monitors who are really excited to start at EEC, and their role is to ensure that each region has a representative and a point person for all of the new requirements, and specifically also to the background record check requirements. Additionally, we have been working diligently as an agency, as the Commissioner stated in our comments, to create policies across the board through for funded programs and also for background record check requirements. So we have been working on those, and we'll be releasing policies to our website and communicating those out. There's about 18 of those that relate to background record check requirements. It's not new, it's just clarifying some of the information that was a process and procedure that was already in place, and it's documenting it into a policy. Additionally, we've created operational manuals, training. There have been numerous trainings that have been provided to individuals using the BRC Navigator system. We have visited the regional offices and did trainings for the programs that feed into the regional offices, and also for the field operations staff on the new technology platform. And then additionally, we are working hard to pull together the communications, webinars, and emails, and we are preparing the field for a rollout. So after October 1st, it's not the end for background record checks. I wish it was, but we have a lot more to do. So GSA, group and school age childcare, and funded programs are 2 important steps, but then we also need to make sure we cover the other program types and bring them into the BRC Navigator. Each of them have their own issues and things that we need to consider, so that's why we had to break it up by program type. Family childcare is very unique because they have their household members and persons regularly on the premises who need to be run, and they're more individual based, so they'll be brought in, as will residential programs eventually. The tricky part there is they are not subject to CCDBG, so we need to modify our process for that. Same for placement agencies. And then adoption and foster parents. We actually do complete background checks on the foster and adoptive parents that aren't overseen by DCF, so we need to make sure that process is built into the BRC Navigator as well. As I indicated earlier, there are still those lingering questions about the National Sex Offender Registry check and out-of-state checks. So the requirement there is that we do that National Sex Offender Registry check on everybody who's in childcare, and we are close to. We had a solution that was close, but there was some questions that remained that required guidance from the feds. So we're holding off on that, but that'll be a future step because the deadline for that is not until 9/30/2020. We also are required to do out-of-state checks on every childcare candidate. where they've resided in the prior 5 years. So every state where they've resided, we need to do a child welfare, criminal, and a sex offender check for them as well. So that needs to be implemented by 9/30/2020. Unfortunately, if we were to use the existing resources and processes out there, it would be extremely manual. So we're hoping that on a federal level, they're able to come up with a solution that'll allow for a more streamlined approach. Nothing yet, but our fingers are crossed. In the meantime, we need to come up with a process. Okay, and as a final part of the presentation, I'll note this is not a part of your binders. It's just an addition that I wanted to provide to you, some screenshots so you can see what it actually looks like. The BRC Navigator screenshots are here on the screen. As a reminder, the BRC Navigator is broken up into 3 modules. The program portal, which is the what the providers use and EE staff actually uses to review the staff information. The programs use it to enter their candidates, and they use it to update whether they've hired or not their candidates. We have the applicant portal, which is used when there is a finding on a record that needs to be reviewed by EEC. That's an opportunity for a candidate to actually submit the documentation that we discussed previously. That's part of the review process. That sends an email link to the candidate, and they're able to provide the documentation. And then the viewer is a piece that the BRC unit internally reviews. They're able to see detailed background record check information in that portion. So just some screenshots here with what programs will be seeing when they enter into the BRC program portal. This is a submission screen where they enter the information of the candidate, date of birth, last 6 of social. I don't know the difference there. I don't think those are different at all, so I'm going to go on to 3. Sorry about that. The next screen shows what the roles are within the BRC program portal of the navigator. They're able to select whether they're employee, volunteer, intern, affiliated person, or program administrator. And they're able to submit the maiden names, aliases as well. And then this is what they're seeing on a program level when they've submitted all of their individuals, or EEC has migrated the information into the BRC program portal. This is what the programs see. They see the staff list of everybody in their program, and then it has, whether the fingerprint has been processed, whether they are completed or in process, their suitability status, whether they're suitable or not suitable, and then they have an opportunity in the actions column, which is on the far right, to select whether to hire them, not hire, make them inactive, or end employment. And this is a dashboard that programs have when they log into the BRC program portal. It shows them at a high level where they need to take action, where they need to confirm employment. It's a helpful tool for them to have. They can click into their queues and go in and make decisions. It'll especially be helpful for those who have a high volume of background record checks. This screen is now the applicant portal. So a candidate who has, yeah, holding call, yeah. Thankfully, this is fake data. Christina was kind enough to ask before she put it in the presentation. Yes, not real data. So this individual is able to, this is a screenshot of what a candidate would receive, an employee, when they have a background check. This is how they retrieve their record, and this is how they upload documentation that we request during the review process. And then this is just showing how they're able to upload documents from their own computer and put them into the system. And then a list of the documents that they want to upload are provided for the candidate so they can see what they are uploading. And then this screen here shows what the BRC unit is looking at internally. They have queues, we anticipate them having a high volume, so they need to be able to manage all of the work, and the queues were designed to assist them with doing so. It helps them determine how to prioritize all of the background record check information that's coming in. And then this is another view of the viewer, the EC viewer. The BRC unit is able to go in and verify the information. And when people call in, they're able to quickly respond to candidates. Another thing that I'm just going to note quickly that I thought about, we did create a contact center. They started in January of 2019, and they've been a huge help to the BRC unit. It used to be that we had one person rotating from the BRC unit whose whole day was dedicated to answering calls and returning emails. So a huge development on our end was we were able to create a contact center. They're solely dedicated to answering phone calls and emails, and they're really able to provide excellent customer support and respond as quickly as possible. So we have 5 staff who were dedicated to BRC, and then we also have 3 staff who cut across both BRC and the learning management system. All right, so that is it, unless I can answer any questions. Yes.
Just a question about the relationship between the state and the feds on this. How explicit, is the federal government about the policies the state should have, and what kind of flexibility do they give us to do, develop our own criteria or policy?
So related to background checks?
Related to BRC.
So yeah, so the federal legislation was extremely explicit, unusually so, related to background checks. They indicated that there were certain types of crimes that had to be disqualifications. They include that we have to find someone not suitable if they provide false or misleading information. So there's a lot of requirements that were in that statute, and then the regulations went into a little bit more detail, very prescriptive as well, and then the final rule even has more detail and more information. So I would say EEC had to combine the federal requirements with what we were already doing. We didn't want to move forward with just mandatory disqualifications because we felt that if you have rape of a child and it's a non-conviction, you should still look at it to make sure that we're not jeopardizing safety of kids. So we were required to kind of combine all of that into one. But I would say a lot of what we are doing is from CCDBG, and we don't have flexibility. The question about the review process for anything that's not a mandatory, that is within our purview, within our flexibility. But we did already have an existing regulatory scheme that we use to combine the federal requirements with what we were applying to child care. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the update. Congratulations on all the progress. Let's move now to the consumer education report. Also, I'm sorry, I just want to acknowledge that those screens are not in use, they're not working, but Christina can certainly send around the decks if folks in the audience would like a copy.
I can do it wherever. I can do it up there. I'm doing a live demo, so I need to have control of the computer. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's so weird to be sitting here. I don't like this. Nowhere to look. My name is Andrew Abeck. I'm the Director of Field Operations Policy. Chair Lasso, Secretary Pizer, Commissioner Eigner Treeworthy sitting behind me, which is also weird. Sorry about that. I'm going to talk about the consumer education website. I've talked a lot about this over the last, I don't know, 6 months now. So I'm going to go pretty quickly over the requirements. I feel like we've hit a lot of those. I want to spend a decent amount of time doing a live demo of both what we have currently on the website and what we're going to be publishing, or the process for publishing visit and investigation information for programs, because that's the big next step of the process. So I'll have some information on go live date for that, but overall I'll take a fairly light touch around some of these slides unless people have questions, and I'll, again, do my best to answer them. All right, federal requirements. So as you know, because I've done this slide a couple times, there are a number of federal requirements around a consumer education website. So the consumer education website project, as we've talked about, is really meant to be a portal into the licensing work that EEC does. There's a number of different requirements around the website, particularly around information about availability of childcare providers, policies and procedures, a lot of the stuff we already had on our website. And the items that are not in bold are items that we've already had published and are all compliant with. And as I've said in the past, there are 2 items that we weren't compliant with yet that we will be starting October 1st, which is monitoring and inspection reports need to be published, as well as an aggregate data report on deaths, serious injuries, and substantiated child abuse in child care programs. Another FYI that this process only applies to child care programs subject to CCDBG. So residential and placement programs are completely outside of this process. They still have a child care search on the website, and we're going to enhance that search this coming year as well. But any of this development is just about licensed and funded child care programs. So some high-level federal requirements around the monitoring and inspection reports. What we need to do is publish all visits and investigations after the launch date. They must be published to the website, which makes sense. It's pretty straightforward. I just want to make totally clear that it's not retroactive. So the message that I'm going to be giving today and the messaging that we're going to be doing in our email communications going forward, hopefully very soon, will be that when the go live date hits, you're not going to all of a sudden see a ton of information on the website. You'll still see the childcare search, and that's a lot of what I'm going to demo today, but you're not going to see all of a sudden old reports, investigations, visits go live. That's not this process. The feds have been very clear that it's prospective, not retroactive. So although I'll be showing you some test data in our test environment, which is why I have to sit here, and I've also given you some screenshots just so you can take home and look at your own time, that the test environment is what I'm using right now to demo what the visits and investigations will look like once we launch and they start to publish. But right now, and even on October 1st, you know, you flip the switch and you're not actually going to see information because any visits or investigations that fall into this criteria are either just starting or they haven't happened yet. And I'll discuss a little bit about what the review and oversight process is, because another piece of this puzzle is to make sure this information gets into the website in a timely fashion, but also that there's no PII issues, personal identifiable information, particularly around minor children, medical information, criminal record information, that sort of thing. So we're going through a process to make sure we review all of that before it gets published. So it's a little bit complicated, but I think we have a pretty streamlined process for that. So the visit and investigation information must be in plain language and accessible in a parent-friendly and user-friendly manner. I'm going to demo that today. Hopefully you all agree. But one nice thing about this project is even after October 1st, there are lots of changes we can make to this website, and we plan on it. We have a lot of, we have funding to continue to do enhancements to the website after October 1st and throughout this fiscal year. So this gets us to compliance, but we know there's a lot more we can do. We've done a lot already. So hopefully that we'll find that there'll be ideas that come from the board or the public or whomever. We're definitely game for hearing ideas of how to make this website even more accessible and usable to families. But at a minimum, it does have to have the visit and investigation information on the site. So we definitely need to do that. And the benchmark that the Fed set is that visits and investigations must be posted no later than 90 days after the date of visit closure. So just be mindful from a process perspective, it's not 90 days after the visit happens because there's a lot of activity that happens after that visit. And I'm going to provide a quick refresher for folks because maybe they've never known or maybe they knew at one point and forgot, and some people in the room might know exactly how we do our visits and investigations. It's going to be super high level, and I'm happy to take questions on it, although I don't do them myself, so I can't really speak to them personally. But there's a whole process of how we do the visit, receive information, issue corrective action plan, statements of noncompliance, receive corrective action plans, and then at that point, once everything's kind of done and dusted, that's when the timer kicks in to do the review and oversight. And just quickly on the aggregate data report, this is a pretty simple report. It just basically spells out in an aggregate data fashion how many deaths, serious injuries, and substantiated allegations of child abuse we've seen identified in programs in any given month. So this will be kind of a running counter that we've developed that's on a data report that'll be published on our website for programs, for incidents that fit into this criteria, but it's not, and no state is doing this. The federal requirement is not to say that it's these specific programs or whatever. It's just specifically how many deaths, serious injuries, substantiated child abuse in any given month for that type of care. So family child care, group and school age, that sort of thing. Okay, very simplified description of the visit process. This is even more simplified than I originally had. The commissioner told me to cut it down even more. There's a lot that actually goes on here, but which again, we could be here all day because it's fascinating. But I just, what, are there? All the RDs are in here and they could speak to it as well. I don't do these, so I have no idea. I hear they're great. But our licensors do, I'm kind of joking, but licensors do great work, and I just don't want to give short shrift to the fact that there's a lot of engagement between a licensor and an investigator and the program through this whole visit process. And if anything gives short shrift, it's that. So just be mindful. And again, I can talk at length about that process here or afterwards. I'm here until 5, so, or probably later. So, probably later, lately. 5:30. So the licensor is assigned an annual unannounced monitoring visit. As you know, that's a requirement as well, one that we've actually been meeting since 2017. And they conduct a visit using a list of visit items for the licensor to inspect and determine compliance. And there's a whole formula around that that's differential monitoring. Folks that were on the board a couple years ago may have some memory of that, and at some point maybe it makes sense to do a refresher. We can talk about that. But long story short, the licensor gets a list of items of what they're going to look for items for compliance. And then when they do their visit, they're going to find out if there are any identified noncompliances, and they'll have a discussion with the program about that. They're going to go do their visit, look. If there's noncompliances, they'll identify them using the lead tool. They have their iPads as well, so they do that live on the visit. And throughout the visit, they provide technical assistance. They engage with the provider, the program. They look through records, really whatever the list of items that they're assigned to do on that visit requires them to do. So the program is notified about any regulatory noncompliances both during the visit, at an exit conference as well, or a debriefing at the end of the visit. But then they're also issued those noncompliances electronically through the lead system. And then once the provider receives those noncompliances, they submit corrective action plans for each and every regulatory noncompliance. So, if a citation for out of ratio or something, they'll specifically spell out what exactly the program has done to remedy that situation, whether it's hire more staff or regroup the classrooms or whatever. And then the licensor has to accept all of those corrective action plans for each individual noncompliance. Once they've done that, the visit's closed, and they move on to their next project, next visit. Investigations work pretty similarly, but there's some slight differences, so it's worthy of noting. Unlike a visit that's scheduled annually, if a complaint or a self-report comes in, an investigation could be triggered based on the nature of the allegation. And investigations can be conducted either by a licensor or an investigator, depending on the nature of the allegation. There's a whole process we have internally around what is escalated to an investigation. As you can probably imagine, the more serious incidents of whether it's child fatality or a serious injury or child abuse are almost certainly going to be escalated to an investigator. Less serious incidents might be investigated by a licensor, but either way, the process is more or less the same. During the investigation, the licensor investigator is going to do their investigative work, which may include a program visit, interviews with staff, children, other parties, coordination with DCF or police, or any other investigation activities. But at this point, this is where they start to look similar to the visits. Once the investigation is complete, the licensor investigator or investigator is going to identify any regulatory noncompliances determined in the investigation to see what regulatory violations they would have found. But the difference between the investigation and the visit is that for the visit, they would have had a whole list of visit items to look for, where in the investigation, they may encounter noncompliances throughout the investigation, but they're not there looking for 30, 40, 50 specific items. But as the investigation unfolds, they may find specific regulatory noncompliances that they cite the program for. So then those noncompliances are told to the program through an exit conference as well as during the investigation. Those are also issued to the program electronically through LEAD, and then the program submits their corrective action plans, much like a visit, for each and every regulatory noncompliance identified. And then the licensor, regardless of whether it was triaged to an investigator or not, is going to be the one to approve any of the corrective action plans, because the licensor is the person who is going to be working with that program over a set period of time as long as they've assigned that program. So an investigator kind of comes in for one specific investigation, and a licensor is the one who's working with that program over many years. Hopefully that wasn't news to everybody, but maybe it was a little bit. So the reason I wanted to flag that is for this slide, is that the changes to the visit investigation process. I know there's a lot of talk, especially when this consumer education website came about, to worry about how is this going to change both the work of the licensors and investigators, but from the provider side as well, how is this going to change our work, our relationships with the licensors? And we've taken great care to try to minimize any changes to the process that we can foreseeably avoid. really what we're doing with this process is when the visit and investigation closes, eventually it needs to be posted on the website. There's some minor steps we need to take along the way to make that more palatable, like you can see on bullet point 1 here, that drafting the statements of noncompliance and the corrective action plans with no personally identifiable information would be ideal. But the process we developed to review before it publishes covers that as well. So we have a multi-step process to make sure that from start to finish, once that visit or investigation gets published online, that there's no PII, as they say. So that refers to that second step. There's an electronic system to ensure that text is reviewed and proofread for PII after the visit closes prior to publishing. And that's a process that we had to develop in the lead system. But that's a process that the provider wouldn't really have any knowledge or involvement in. They don't need to. Everything that's been issued to the provider as far as noncompliances, they would have already responded to. So the time from when a provider or an educator is cited for any noncompliance is definitely the first time. It's not going to be the first time they see it when it goes on the website. They'll have responded to every specific noncompliance. This is just the last step of how do you take that instead of sitting in a folder that someone, if they have the wherewithal to know EEC exists and that licensors exist and that they can call us up and say, hey, I want to know visit and information about a program, instead of having to call us and we can get that to them. And we still can do that. That process definitely doesn't change. But now they can go online. Over time, as we build up this information, they'll have a library of visits and investigations for parents, members of the community can find, so that this information is more self-service, because that's the point of this whole project, is to avoid the step of having to call EEC. And you can find this information online, and that's what we're going for here. So as I noted, that the work, we've worked to minimize any disruption for licensors and investigators. Past and future outreach plans. So we've done a decent amount, although I wish I could have done more, to be honest. There's so many hours in the day. Focus groups and demos were held with the following stakeholders. I've did a tremendous amount with the internal staff because there was a lot of concern around making sure that this process doesn't change and that there's, they understand what that process is going to look like, what the interfaces look like. And when I do the demo, I think hopefully that'll put a lot of context around this, because it's one thing to say we have to post stuff to a website, but until you actually see it, you're like, okay, well, let me know what it looks like when it's ready, because the devil's in the details with a lot of this stuff. So that's what we're going to do here, and a lot of what I'm going to do here is what I've done with these stakeholder groups. I did the webinar with all EC staff. I did a session with the CCRNRs. I did a session with the representative provider group and a session with EOE in the governor's office. But we're just starting. We have a lot more activity we want to do throughout 2019 and 2020, and that would be engagement with additional provider groups, parent and community members, and I'm also doing a presentation at the CCRNR statewide conference in October to discuss the website and what we've developed. One thing to keep in mind too is that I think when you use the site is really when parents and community members are going to want to have more engagement in it, because it's, even when I do this demo, I'm going to navigate it pretty quickly, but I've been living this for the last 6 months. But I want to make sure that a parent can use the site in an efficient way. And the only way to do that is to have it live, ready for people. Although the search is live, the information around visits and investigations is not yet. So there's only so much you can actually access. This is an important slide. Go live date and other important information. So as I said earlier, but I'll just say it again so I'm abundantly clear about what the expectations are. So visits, if they're conducted on or after October 1st, 2019, they'd be subject to publication on the website. But a visit will not publish until it's completely closed, with any noncompliances issued and corrective action plans accepted and reviewed by an EC staff member for PII. So in theory, this goes live October 1st. In practice, we'll probably start seeing visit reports trickle in October, November, December, depending on the turnaround time for us to publish them. And I'll show you a little bit when I show the demo and screenshots, but any visit or investigation that has no noncompliances should in theory publish quickly because there's no PII to review. And you'll see what that looks like when I show you the interface. Investigations are going to work similar but a little bit different. It's the same start date, but it would be any investigations opened on or after that date. Because an investigation could have multiple visits. It doesn't really make sense to tie the start date to a visit. Any investigations that start on or after October 1st is going to be subject to publication on the website. Similar to the same caveats about review and publication. And then the aggregate data report for death, serious injuries, and child abuse will begin aggregation on October 1st as well.
One question.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about this before, but the question is, how are we going to scope the information for the public? In other words, how do I understand how to, do I mean, I have to believe that parents' inclination is going to be to skip right over programs with anything here. And so how do we help with this notion of like a denominator or something? I mean, have you all been talking about this?
I'd say it's the biggest question we've been talking about, and I know we talked about it at the beginning of the summer as well. We'll show you what we've put together, and I think that might help a little bit, but honestly, I mean, I'll just say from my own research, and I think I've mentioned this in the past too, we've looked at maybe 20 other states' websites over the course of this development. Some states do this really well, some states not so much, and hopefully we're in the mix of who does it well. Some states have a complicated formula around like points and rating good and okay, and honestly, it's my opinion, I'm curious what folks think, like that's just another series of numbers to get lost in as well. And you can make pros and cons around that kind of, like, first of all, we don't do that. Like, we don't have, like, 50 out of 55 means an excellent visit, because you could have 2 really bad citations, but they could be really, really bad. And you could have 5 citations that are, relatively typical. And the tack we're taking, at least in this first step, and we can make further developments along the way, is our goal is to present the information to parents. And hopefully, in the clearest, most, user-friendly way, for them to make the best decisions. But Chair Lasso, I mean, it's a great question, I think, to ask, and one that, I welcome any, guidance or feedback on. And I know we chatted with Secretary Pizer a couple weeks ago about giving him some insight into the website, and he had some good ideas as well. So we'll make the changes we can make before October 1st, but we definitely can make changes after that. Nothing is locked in.
What's a good state that you've looked at that you think has a good model?
Yeah, I really like Georgia. Georgia has a really solid website. They have a pretty solid EEC equivalent, just we've noticed from our work with them at the STAM conference every summer. They seem to be really locked in to a lot of their early learning stuff. And I like their website because it's very clean, but also seems to present everything in a user-friendly way. That was just the one that always jumped out to me. But I don't know if you have work in other states at all, but I mean, even just on your own time, Googling around, every state should have a site that has this information. And I think it's a challenge. A lot of states have solutioned this differently. To some degree, we've benefited from the LEAD system, having that information flow directly from LEAD to the website. So what we're not doing, thankfully, is printing out reports, scanning them into PDFs and uploading them. That would be a really time-consuming process. There's a real straight information flow from our LEAD system to the website with this new piece of the review for PII, which is also built into the LEAD system. But yeah, Georgia would be the one that jumps out to me. Any questions before I turn to the, oh, I'm sorry.
Just one more. This Georgia attempt, back to Noni's point, to categorize or to put in categories, health and safety being maybe primary concern, but then maybe program issues like the sand table didn't have sand,
Yeah, I honestly can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to double check. My memory is that they don't, but don't quote me on it. So I feel like maybe like Texas has a formula around like how they do. I vaguely remember that. And it's your mileage may vary, around this piece, of category. I just know from especially my former role as in the legal unit here, you can have a visit with 3 citations, but those citations are really, really bad. And you can have a visit with 5 citations, but those citations are again, relatively typical and maybe don't implicate health and safety quite as much. So I think it's also a larger discussion to have around licensing and quality, and I think something the Commissioner is interested in from her perspective as well. I don't know if you have anything you want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I was just going to add that Georgia in particular has been around a while as an agency and had been doing this for a while, and so has a lot of lessons learned from being out in the field. And I think that as Andrew pointed out, and I think what our next 6 months particularly look like is getting some of that feedback from the field once in action to be able to continue refining and make sure that there is a translation to I think, Sharon, to your point, that the parents are busy. They have different priorities, and how you communicated complicated compliance information to parents who are trying to grapple with a whole bunch of other factors, not just how do I cull through a website to identify, is going to be an iterative challenge that we're going to have to confront. And so really getting this out, not with the idea of like, check, we've met compliance and now it's out there in the field, but really on the let's get something out there so we can start to get the feedback and have some planned improvement dates where we can implement that feedback and continue to make this a user-friendly tool, but ultimately really something that helps translate what we know about quality in child development and what supports really good environments for children to learn from to the way parents make childcare choices, which is often very disconnected. And I think this is a one tool in getting to that we're really trying to strive, not just get it out there, but then get the feedback and iterate on it.
Any other questions before I turn to the demo? And before I do that, I just want to give a super quick shout out to some of the folks who worked on the project. I think they're in the room, but some of the MTX team, Garang, Farman, Sidman, if you can just like throw your hand up in the air or something. Those guys, yeah, they did amazing, amazing, amazing work. And they'll be around if you want to talk to them afterwards because they love this stuff. We make them love this stuff. Well, they love it anyway. But the work that they've turned around so quickly and so thoughtfully and engaged in our process and learning what licensors do is another reason why this, this project is successful, or I hope it's successful. All right. I'm going to try to do this without crashing anything. Okay. And I'm going to make some apologies in advance because I've done this on the screen before, but you can't see what my laptop looks like, but it's very crunched because it has to, basically everything's a little bit squished, so if it looks a little weird, I'll try to fix it, and I know you can't really see in the room, so I apologize, unless someone can figure out how to turn those screens on real quick. So quickly, I'm going to go first over what is currently live. I'm not sure if members of the board have played around with this site yet. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But this has actually been live since end of February. We've made some tweaks and enhancements over the summer to the search functionality. So I'm going to go over it fairly quickly, but I can certainly stop and go over stuff in more detail if you want. And then I'm going to turn to the test environment so we can see what the visit and investigation information is going to look like with some test data I mocked up, where that has only 1 or 2 typos that I haven't fixed yet, so just ignore those. But so basically, this licensed childcare search is currently live on the site. You can find this either on our website under Find a Licensed Childcare Program. Although what we did was we used SEO, search engine optimization, for this to hopefully float up to the top of most people's Google search. So if you type in like Massachusetts childcare search, that sort of thing, it should be one of the first links that comes up that's below all the ads that you get in Google because they still put the ads up top. But we'll be up there. So there's 3 different ways to search for programs. One is using just a general program demographic search, whether it's by the program name. And you can actually type in the actual street address, city or town or zip code. And you can use one or all of these to search for a program. So for example, if I was like, I know there was a childcare program with the word Bright in the name, but I just can't remember what it is. I could just search for Bright. This is why it looks bad, because it's all squished. Okay. So you could see this is going to return all childcare programs with the word Bright in the name. So Bright Horizons or any other program that has Bright. Again, apologies for the squish, but there's a Google map on the right. Any little pin is going to represent a childcare program. You can click on one of those little pins and get an idea of what that program is. There's also a column on the left here that has all of the programs that are returned on the search. So, and that would be the program name and the address and that sort of thing. For family childcare providers, if you were to type in a name, you would get something similar. So the little green pins are family childcare programs, and the like maroonish color are group and school age programs. So you can see if you know, let's say you were looking for someone with the last name Smith in the city of Boston. Let's try that. Nothing. That's not good. Well, I don't know. I tried. Okay. But anyhow, you can continue to narrow your search. I should have probably had a couple sample searches if I were smart. Let's say Kingston, because I see that. So we found Kim Aerosmith in the city of Boston, or city of Kingston. Okay, so yeah, you can search for programs in that way. 2 things that we added, let me just clear this search, is that you can actually filter by program type. So if you know you want just family childcare programs, that's all you're interested in, any search that you make could just return family childcare, and the same applies for group and school age. The other filter we added was age group. And this is licensed capacity age group. So let's say I have an infant, and I don't want any programs that don't serve infants because I have an infant, and that's the care I'm looking for. If you were to choose infant, and even if I was just saying, let's say Boston, this will return all programs in the city of Boston that serve infants. So you could see there's some family childcare drop down or pins, because family childcare can serve any type of child depending on the specific ratio requirements around children under 2. They're always going to be returned in a child age search for any type of child age, but for a group in school age, it would only be programs that have capacity to serve that child. So if it's just a school age only program, it wouldn't be returned in this search, which is pretty cool. But one thing it doesn't do, unfortunately, is tell you whether there's actual capacity for enrollment in that program. Unfortunately, we just don't have that data. We have some wild ideas maybe down the road around how we can maybe do that we're thinking about for FY20. But for now, this will at least tell you, can this program serve that age group? Not, yes, we have available slots. That's a whole nother lift that I think we're open to looking into, but it's pretty complicated. Yep. Yeah, and so we had some ideas of approaches. One was like, because we have the lead portal now and every program has access to a lead portal, to have like almost like if you were looking for a doctor, like accepting new patients, to potentially have like an accepting students. The only challenge, of course, is that the program would be responsible for making sure that was updated. So if they wanted to, they have, and I can just imagine they'd be like, why am I saying that I'm, have availability because I'm not? And, it's like, go into your lead portal and
I also want to point out, so this is something I have actually grappled with many, many times. This is one of the most difficult things to do for 2 reasons. One, as you all know, parents turnover. You may have a parent unenroll in the morning, and by the afternoon you have someone standing at your door that then also has to go through perhaps eligibility checks, unclear whether that slot is taken or not during that time. I think the other really, really critical issue that's hard from the parent side is that a lot of agencies constantly want to be accepting parents and may say, I might have a slot next week, which may work. That causes a lot of distrust for parents who are calling programs being told that it has availability when it may or may not have active availability today for your child to start, or availability for your child that family may be eligible for. So the complications of getting this and getting it right, I think almost every state and community that has grappled with this has had those same kind of challenges. And while, yes, it is like the penultimate, how do we solve this problem to provide system-wide availability information for parents, the complications and the challenges of causing distrust in the website overall really have to be thought of carefully as you grapple with it. So.
Yeah, sometimes our ideas don't match up with the available data or the practicalities of it, but I mean, we're open to all ideas, so we'll let you know if for whatever reason we can't do it.
So one thing you could imagine, though, to meet in the middle on this issue is to list capacity and the average new enrollments per year, per 6 months, or something to kind of scope the center, if you will, or the setting.
Yeah, I think that is a good, there's some trend information over years that I think particularly now programs having enrollment or having access on lead might be able to, on the technology system, might make it easier to pull some of this information and provide some annual trend information. Also, I think as we think about churn rates and how often we are seeing turnover in childcare, some of that information is useful for us, and how we dissect it and communicate it to parents is a challenge going forward that we should look at.
Cool. One thing I just wanted to mention, wait, were there other questions? Okay. One thing I wanted to mention was what we added, and I just did a quick version of this. We added a feature that says download your search results. So if you just want to get, okay, I got my search, I'm happy with the 5 programs I'm returning. Let me just get their information splashed into an Excel file. You can click that button and you get something that looks like this. This is obviously probably more than you'd want, but just to show you, you can get the addresses, program information, phone number. So you can, if you had, let's say, a search for 5 programs, you're like, all right, let me call down the list and see what availability is. So we're trying to just create whatever functionality we can that we can think of that's doable for folks that they would actually want. I'll go through the other searches pretty quick because I just want to make sure I turn to the visit information. The second way of searching is a radius search, and you could do a radius around a certain address. So let's do here, and we'll do 2 miles. And again, you can filter by, let's say we want all GSA programs that serve kindergartners. I don't know. Search. And you'll get a nice little map here of all of our GSA programs within 2 mile radius of 51 Sleeper Street. The nice thing is that you get a real clear sense of what the search is entailed with the red circle. And again, the same rules apply. You click on the little pin, and you can see the information of the program, and then the program information is also dropped down here in alphabetical order. So, and you could do this radius search up to 20 miles. I've tested it, and you get like almost every childcare program in greater Boston area, and it doesn't crash the site, which I'm pretty excited about. Little victories. Oh yeah, they tell me what we can't do, and usually they say we could figure it out, which is cool. Yeah, I just tell them to try something, and speaking of which, this is something that they developed, which we absolutely didn't have to, but we think could be pretty useful, so I'm going to try it. So this is what's called My Route Search, and the idea is that you could type in 2 addresses, and it's going to find you programs along a designated driving route. We're working on like subway and bus and stuff like that, but at least this does some functionality around, you know, if you're driving to work, is there childcare programs along your route that you can drop the kid off at? So let's try, I don't know, let's try 51 Sleeper Street. This is going to be probably silly because I'm going to go really far, but let's do the Worcester office. I do that drive sometimes. I'm in Worcester a lot. Cool. Marisol can validate that. Okay, so you could see, I'm going kind of quickly, but you could see the driving route, which is basically the Mass Pike, and programs that are right off the Mass Pike. Probably not the best example because you probably wouldn't pop right off the highway, but you know, more realistically, you can put between 2 routes, and it's going to find programs along that route. One thing you can do, which is kind of neat, we added this distance from route slider. So if you're seeing programs that are just, you know, either you're not seeing a sufficient number of programs, we've tested this out in Western Mass, obviously a bit more rural, you could slide it out to more, and it's going to find more programs that are a little bit broader off your route. And if you're finding too many programs and it's overwhelming, you want to stick more to your route, you can do less, and you can find programs that are more stuck to your route. Probably should have chosen 2 better addresses because no one's driving right off the Pike, but I think you get the idea. Cool. Any questions about the search functionality?
I have a comment. I just want to go back to 1982 when we started a resource and referral agency, and we had recipe boxes with 3x5 cards, and you've come a long way.
It's amazing what smart people in the back end Google can do for you. I mean, it's actually amazing because, I mean, so much of this information, like, we have embedded Google functionality, but also we're tapping into the data that we collect through our lead system, through our licensing process. So this is just a synthesis of all of that development work, and presenting it in a user-friendly way, like I said, is challenging, but if you're seeing that is a long time coming since 1982, which was before I was born, then that's good. Just saying, I was not alive then. No, it wasn't meant to be a dig. I always get teased for being young, so I'm more making fun of myself. But yeah, she's younger than me back there. Okay, but yeah, it's amazing the technology that we have to let us do this work. I was not meant to be a dig. I apologize. It's making fun of myself. Okay, so what I'll do is show the test environment for visits and investigations, and then I'll wrap up if folks have questions. So again, this is test environment. As you can see, test 1 GSA is fake data. Apologies. But what I really want to show is just what this interface is going to look like, because this is the functionality that's going to launch October 1st. As you can see, there's 2 separate sections. We have a section for inspection and monitoring visit reports and a section for investigations. We separate them out for the reasons that we said before, that they're slightly 2 different processes, and the commissioner's already noted, and I know the secretary as well, that we can put some clarifying information around, just so folks are clear how those processes are different, and that's something we're going to add before we go live, so just so folks are aware. But something that Chair Lasso was talking about as far as characterizing level of compliance, right now what this number represents, as you could see for this monitoring visit that we're going to look over, is the visit date, what kind of visit it was, monitoring. We have as much help text as we could fit onto this website to show people what our terminology means, and we can always add more. So if there's stuff that you're seeing and you're like, it's still not clear, I'm a parent, I wouldn't understand that, we can always add more information, like level of compliance, for example. This number represents the number of visit items that were deemed compliant over the number of visit items overall, and that's what this help text explains.
But like right there, do we know what the average is? I mean, in other words, could you give a state average right there so that folks can make sense of the number?
Yeah, and I
something?
think the challenge with this is that I think that the it has been noted already, but the challenge is that the average may not be the severity, right? And so that we may have an average. I think that it's a really good question of, and I think the secretary has already brought this up as well, and is one of the improvements before we go live of thinking about this. Can we put some FAQs on what does health and safety mean? What things should you be looking for? And then I think we can continue to iterate, particularly as this goes live and we get some real-time feedback from parents as how can we make this make more sense to them, and how do you compare programs to each other? The challenge is 31 out of 36, as you say, on monitoring may be great for one program, and 35 out of 36 may be really egregious on the other program.
And what detail is there on the 5?
So I think this is where Andrew will go with the
Yep.
view detail.
So I'll dive in. Because the way to think about the visit reports is that there's 3 layers of levels of information. This is your top level, right? It was a visit. This is the general gist of what we saw, 31 out of 36. But I want to know more. So let's click View Detail. And it's going to load a middle level screen, which has a bigger summary of information. As you can see, we separate the information by domain category, and this is based on our visit tools. So is it classified as an administration regulation, care of children, curriculum activities? This is pulled straight from the visit tools that are built into LEAD. And what we did was we had an indicator for if all of the items were compliant, we gave it a check mark, and if one or more items was deemed non-compliant, we would put this little yellow caution sign here. This also aligns with what the providers see on their visit summaries when they get their issued that through LEAD. So we try to create alignment wherever possible as far as imagery, icons, that sort of thing, so that it's comfortable for providers when they're seeing this information. On the website, they're like, oh, this more or less looks what I've seen in my report I got directly. Yes. Well, we have a key indicator, which we're actually going to eliminate, because what that is, it's more of an internal kind of LEAD visit tool item, but we're finding that it doesn't really tell you that much as far as the information around the visit. So that's another item that we're going to get rid of before we go live. But yeah, yellow and green. I'm trying, let me figure out how to explain it.
Key indicator is more an internal process,
Yeah.
and so that won't show up on the website. It will just be the green and yellow by the time it goes live next week.
Yeah, it has to do more with the differential monitoring process. Okay, so now you got your middle view, right? You're like, okay, this looks fine. There's a couple citations. Let's see what they are. Click on the little down arrow, and this is where you get into the meat of the visit report. It's a lot of information, but this is, in order to get to compliance, we do need to post the statements of noncompliance and corrective action plans for any violation or citation. So as you can see, again, this is totally test data, so I just took a stab at trying to put together a noncompliance and corrective action plan, but the idea being that what's the visit item name? It tells you generally what it is. If you hover over the help text, it tells you exactly the description of what that item that the licensor looked for was. We need to fix this too. These regulations are clickable, and you can actually see what the regulations are if you care to go that deep, but most people won't. They probably just, nice to know that they're there. And we flag non-compliant. This statement of compliance is exactly what the licensor would have issued to the program, exactly the text. And the corrective action plan is the text that the provider would have provided to us to say, this is how I'm going to remedy the non-compliance.
And is the date there somewhere for this?
Well, the date would be up top here for the visit, yeah.
I see.
Yep, and then the date that all the corrective action plans were accepted is here as well. Because remember that once we accept all the corrective action plans, that's when the visit closes. And the corrective action plans, we accept or reject them individually. So it's not uncommon that they submit 5 corrective action plans, we accept 4, we reject 1, just because it's not on point exactly. Yeah, we want to know specifically how you're going to keep the bleach away from children, not that you're going to keep the bleach away from children, a lock on the door or something like that. That's what we look for.
Ask a
Mhm.
technical PII question.
Of course.
So in some contexts, you typically can't use somebody's name, but in some contexts you can't use other information that would allow someone who is aware of the program to know who you're talking about. So in this case, this example, the program's qualified administrator. Well, there may be 1 or 2 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the boundary so that we can be clear here about what the violation is or what the noncompliance is, even though it may be obvious to anyone who knows the program who we're talking about?
That's a great question. I would say the PII concerns, and I would definitely let the commissioner speak to this a little bit as well, but around children's information is the biggest priority, right? As far as staff, like, I mean, when you have a family child care provider was cited for, it's clear who it is. Staff information is a little bit less protected. There's some rules around personnel information as far as like not disclosing whether an educator was terminated or that kind of thing, which we'll need to make sure we cover in this PII redaction piece. But as far as staff information, it's a little bit less of a concern. It's really the children's names, medical information, DCF information, personnel information. Anything that we would redact out of a public records request would really be the key here.
I think, and to sum that up on staff information, staff names, we are very careful about. Staff roles are part of the regulations and would be identified on there.
So it seems to me then that the capacity building educative function of this is probably on the prior screen, trying to figure out how to explain those like dozen indicators there, right? Which would, because there's something going on where you can get the macro or you can get into the weeds that they don't keep their staff records, but there's something on that middle page, the sort of like the nature of the interactions, the curriculum, and something there seems like where this would have its greatest potential to circle back to your point, Commissioner, about the value add of this, aside from searching and maybe being clear that there are repeated problems, but it's that middle screen in a way, right? The dozen or so indicators.
Yeah, and I think our primary concern before putting it out is making sure that that is clear and that there is enough help text on that. I think that, so to get to the point of how do you start to look at repeated patterns, we do have a little bit, since this will all be new incident reports and new investigations, new monitoring visit as of October 1st. That is why the 6-month process to start to get to a couple. One monitoring visit also doesn't tell you a pattern in a site. And so how do we start to look at that? And I think it's also about the how do we provide this information in a way. I think the team has done a very thoughtful job of trying to translate this as much as possible to layman's terms. I think that in general, we speak early childhood speak in many times as well, and so we may not always recognize that we have a care of children as a definition that we understand, that parents or quite frankly, trusted individuals that parents are turning to who may spend more time, medical providers, churches, places where parents are accessing that may say, I have a number of parents who I need to help find places. A lot of people are asking these questions. We want this to be a resource to them and that to help translate this to parents as well. And that's going to be an iterative feedback process that I think once we go live, we'll have a more effective cadence for because it will be used in real time.
Yeah, I think the only other thing that I would say is I think we should strongly consider that some average or mode, the modal number or something is still better than nothing,
Absolutely.
right? That there's just got to be a way that we owe it to the public to try to scope these numbers.
Yeah.
This has been this is your world, right?
Absolutely.
Medicine has wrestled with this for a long time.
A lot of satisfaction surveys. So I mean, my take, I'm 10 years away from doing this myself, but parents ask this sort of thing all the time. I think using the Google Maps, you find a bunch of places, and then you look at this. The yellow and green are just your automatic, right? So my first question is, if I were to go to 5 places, do we have a sense that most of them have some yellow?
Yep. No, I don't think we have that right now, but I think that is a good way to respond to this aggregation is rather than a number or a trying to give some statewide averages. Yeah.
If I went to 4 places around my job and I found 4 daycares,
Yep.
and all of them had a bunch of green and a bunch of yellow, right? Then it would even itself out, and then I would look and see what they were. And if it was health, would be like, forget it, let me look at the other ones first. And care of children, I would say, let me look at the other ones first.
Right.
The others, the postings, I probably wouldn't care. I think, right.
Right.
Therefore, I wouldn't care, right?
Right.
I assume it means they didn't put online when they're closing or their phone number or something. Right. So then my next question is, how long do these stay there? So if you had 5 years ago a health issue, a baby died of SIDS and one person wasn't trained, but of course there's been total turnover and everyone is on their game now. How long is it yellow?
So we're required to post 3 years of information. So any visits and investigations would be on the site for 3 years from the date of that visit or investigation. That's a federal requirement. We can go more than that if we wanted to, and most states have. I believe most states have gone to about 5, but we have some choice there, but at a minimum it's 3.
I mean, this is, I think, for the Office of Child Care's new regulations in general, this is one of the hardest things to navigate in terms of this information, because there are regulations that we have to include every single non-compliance, which we have done, but we know that some of those non-compliances, as Andrew pointed out with postings, is, easily rectified. They didn't have emergency contact information. They now have emergency contact information. How you communicate the level of difference in an equitable way across various regions, various types of programs, various types of quality, and most importantly, not scare people away from wanting to find childcare at all, is really difficult. And these suggestions, I think, are things we can absolutely take back and think about how we contextualize. Allison, I really think that that's a good way to respond to some of the aggregation, is just looking at yellow and green and thinking about how do we kind of highlight that one yellow may not be a deterrent from going to childcare. However, you do want to dig deeper because that one yellow may be something very severe too. And how do we communicate that balance without scaring people?
I think that
It's hard.
only one has yellows and
Yep.
then 6 have all greens. I'm probably not going to want to go to the one with any yellow. Why would I?
Right.
Right. But if they all have yellows,
Right.
but if you put a single red there, I'm not going to go.
Right.
Right. And there's a reason why we didn't use red at all, because, when I said the devil's in the details with this, is that, all of this UI user interface work, it's all around colors and symbols and that sort of thing. And red is scary to people. Yellow shows that there's an issue. Green, we're all used to. But it's the challenge in this UI work. It's really, we've gone back and forth on a lot of this, and it's very challenging.
Eleonora, did you have?
I just have a question and comment. I'm sort of associating this with the equivalent in higher education of being accredited.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm thinking about is that most institutions of higher education have something that they need to improve on. But we have a way of explaining that and still say we are accredited. So you have areas for improvement and you have 5 years to sort of do something about it. But you are accredited, or you are accredited with probation status, or you are not accredited. Are we doing something like that? Because having this, it's helpful. My suggestion would not be frequently asked questions, but more of a sort of narrative that can be explained for each one of the programs. But what I wonder is there a sort of like a grouping, sort of 3 categories? Yes, you are accredited, you have probation status, or you are in deep trouble.
Quite frankly, honestly, this is where the system needs to combine, because the QRIS system that you all have been intimately
Working on.
involved in, when coupled with this tool, once operationalized, will provide a much more comprehensive lens of quality rather than just a monitoring compliance report. And we're actively working to try to figure out how we can link those up as that becomes operationalized too.
So, with regard to the yellow, right? So, having worked for an organization in the past that was licensed by EEC, you get your corrective action plan, and then you say how you're going to correct it, but then you actually do it. So, when you actually do it, does the yellow turn to green?
Right now, this site flags it doesn't turn to green. The visit report would drop off completely. But yeah, any of these corrective action
if they
plans.
fixed what the problems were, they
Right.
still shouldn't have the
Right.
yellow mark. It should,
Yeah.
be like they fixed it. So the issue is no longer an issue, right?
Yes, except we do need to report out non-compliance is identified. Yeah.
Historically, but there could be a in process versus result.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yellow and a light yellow.
Yeah.
It's an orange and a yellow.
My thinking on that would be.
And I look at this with the
That's- yeah.
turnover in the field, right, is that if this was an issue with a single staff person that then the administrator dealt with, and that is certainly rectified, right? If this is an issue where it was a systems issue and the entire agency turned over, then that's also rectified. If it's a systems issue and one person turned over, that may or may not be rectified. So I think the nuance here is really important, and yeah, this is all really great feedback. We'll
Do they actually allow, I know it's a government website, but is there room for provider comment?
So the corrective action plans are submitted by the providers. This is text from the provider responding to the
Right, but that's their
noncompliance.
formal response to the.
Correct.
I'm just saying, like, not to oversimplify, but like Yelp, right? You get so many stars, and then you see the comments about what's going on, or even comments from parents that utilize the service on that they were satisfied. It just, otherwise it's too scientific and not qualitative enough for me.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I will say that when I presented this project to the Provider Advisory Council back in March or May of last year, one of the comments I got from one of the providers, I wish I could remember who it was, is this better not be like Yelp. So it's challenging, you know? I mean, I remember specifically thinking like, yeah, I mean, I think as a government agency, we have a challenge to present the information fairly and clearly, but as partially as possible, and our attempt here is to do that. As far as ratings and quantification and allowing for comments, there's a couple worries about that. I'm not like necessarily opposed to it. Any text that needs to go on this website is in theory sanctioned by us, that it's allowed to go up. So any free text that's published needs to go through some sort of review process. So there's more of a work lift on that piece. And then, you know, I'm just thinking of like Facebook comments or, you know, YouTube, that kind of thing can get a little messy. I believe we have that, and if we don't, we can. Oh, we don't have that because we need to be able to get the link to their.
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's something we can definitely incorporate if we can allow that in the lead portal. Yeah, we should.
And do we verify corrective action plans? I mean,
Yes.
so we will go out and say a correction has been made, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And depending on the nature of the visit, they might do a follow-up visit based on the findings, that sort of thing. This is just printing out what's the result of the visit, so it doesn't change that process. But yes, yeah, we would.
Joan and then Mary, and then I think we'll move it along.
Thank you, Andrew. This is actually a huge leap forward in terms of the level of information that we're able to provide to parents, and something that we've been aspiring to for a very long time as we think about really trying to empower parents to demand quality. And so, you know, I appreciate the complexity of weighing out all the information, but I also really see this as an important kind of step on a broader evolution that we can eventually, as the commissioner said, link up to something like QRIS. But I think we also need to bear in mind that this is just one set of inputs that parents are garnering as they go through the selection process. A lot of it's going to be word of mouth. A lot of it's going to be an intuitive reaction when they visit. This is the kind of thing to help them get started and to help them make their own best judgments. And I think that it provides a real depth of information for anyone who wants to go that deep, and a good entry point for parents to begin that process. This is a challenging and often sort of personal process that people have to go through. And so I actually think the way it's laid out, while it doesn't solve every problem, is really good, and that we can trust parents to do their best work on behalf of their children. And I think this helps us to do that. So thank you to you and the whole team on getting us to this point.
I appreciate that. And I'll just say before the final question is the conversation we're having here are conversations we've been having for months. And some of these challenges are like, you know, are really challenging. And this discussion is great because it's validating some of the kind of design decisions we've made, but also knowing that, you know, how much do you handhold, how much do you rely on parents to be able to make the best decision, and how do you educate parents to be able to use this? The thing I keep saying, and I think we can make this clear on the site, is this should be one tool in the toolkit. This should be maybe be a starting point, but you know, step 2 might be call up the program and schedule a tour, call the licensor and get some more information. There's going to be lots of more steps that a parent or a member of the public would want to use once you've seen this. And the best we can do is just try to present this information as fairly, which is one of the reasons why we chose to do compliant items as well. We didn't have to, but it seemed crazy not to show 50 items that they were compliant with and the 3 that they weren't, why just post the 3? Let's post them all and see the great work that programs are doing and the great work that the licensors are doing to try to identify any risks to health and safety. So thank you.
Actually, I think Joan's comment and your comment is a great place to end. My question is really just
Wonderful. Awesome. Okay. I'm happy to call it if no more
Great.
questions.
Really, really nice, and
Yeah.
and certainly definitely want to echo Joan's comments, which is big picture. This is a huge, huge leap forward. So thank you.
Awesome.
Definitely.
Thanks, everybody.
I just want to set expectations for what to stay in compliance. There are definitively some text changes, some clarifications and additions that we are absolutely intend to make before this goes live to the public. Technology infrastructure changes are probably not on the docket before it goes public. That will be part of the iteration just because of the time constraints of making sure that we do remain in compliance with this huge step forward. So
Great.
As we go forward.
Thanks so much. So final item has to do with a report to the legislature on the CCDBG expenditures. So I'll turn it over to the commissioner.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I am going to fully admit that I deep dove and got caught up as quickly as possible, but I really want to thank the finance team for helping me understand this issue as best as I possibly can. And I understand it's a little bit hard to hear when people are sitting here, so I'm going to try to online. So I'm going to try to speak closely and articulate. So a little bit of background on this is that Congress passed a bill that included a significant appropriation for the Child Care Development Block Grant in 2018, and that you have the numbers of where that resulted for Massachusetts in increases in our discretionary fund to spend for the CCDBG. Noting on this that it is over 2 fiscal years and that our flexibility on how and when we appropriate those dollars, we have a little bit more flexibility than just the federal fiscal year, and so that'll come up at the end as well. I also want to give a little bit of background around the guidance that we received from the Administration of Children and Families, from HHS at the time, around how we actually spend those funds. That they're given that it was uncertain if this was going to be a continued appropriation. We did actually get some clear guidance on them on how we allocate these funds towards becoming compliant with the new CCDBG rules and in building the systems and infrastructure that would be needed to be able to maintain compliance. As well as making sure that we do look at access and rates to and making sure that we are addressing the discrepancy between subsidy rates and market rates for programs. Now the report. So this is, when we look through this is the requirement of the report with the budget bill, and I'm still learning all of the Massachusetts terminology, so I'll expect the secretary will wave me down and tell me when I have messed up some legislative process in my terminology. But this is outside Section 92 of Chapter 41. This is the requirement for EEC to report in conjunction with the Department of Administration and Finance on our expenditures for the federal funds and additional grant money that we received from the feds. So we will talk through these. You have the full document, the full report in your packet, so we'll just highlight the highlights on this and then be able to answer questions as you might have them. Keep up with my notes too. This is one area where I cannot wing it, because I'm learning quickly. The federal funding and the way that the report was written, there are 4 different types of federal funding that we are reporting on to the legislature. You have the Child Care Development Fund, the Child Care Development Block Grant, and this includes expenditures that directly reimburse through the Child Care Development Fund, and we give to child care related activities. So So this includes our federal match, our mandatory funding, and our discretionary funding, and funding that we transfer from the temporary assistance for needy families into the child care development discretionary award fund. So you have the numbers there of in FY19, that was about just over $220 million of our expenditures were reimbursed. Keep in mind, this is a block grant, so we have an up to a reimbursement amount and functions as revenue for the state as we appropriate these expenditures. Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF, commonly known as welfare. You may know that this is also a block grant, and that this includes expenditures reimbursed specifically through that block grant that supports low-income families, and is in collaboration with the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. Again, that is claimed specifically to TANF, not to CCDF, for clarification there, and is about $199 million of our expenditures. There are other federal funds. These are small federal funds. We can detail them out, but the biggest contributor to this is the Title IV-E federal match, which specifically is targeted to youth in foster care. And then the general fund, which is our state appropriation, is the general revenue fund that supports most of a significant portion of our funding as well, and is spent as a lot of this is spent as a condition of receiving certain federal funding dollars, so a state match or maintenance of effort requirements. This is the general fund that we use to do that. So those are the types of funds. In the report, you have this full list of the categories that we actually use to report to the federal fund. So you have each of our line item numbers that we use, 3,000 dash something, and whether any expenditures from that line item are used to claim federal funds, so are reported to the feds recorded to the feds for reimbursement, and by which federal fund they are reimbursed for. So you can see on this that the state general revenue fund actually is used at every single line item to supplement federal funds. Two notable components of this, too, again, goes a little bit deeper in the report, is that when we look at, there are two types of reimbursements, and that's caseload and non-caseload. And the finance team, I'm not going to screw this up by going into every single fund, federal fund, and how we reimburse them, because then they will kick me from behind and tell me I'm messing it up. But at a high level of what I understand to be the case, the non-caseload is for reimbursement is things that are not about subsidy dollars to families or providers on behalf of families, and the non-caseload, one notable component is that we exclude most of our 3,000, 1,000, the administrative component from reimbursement. So that is mostly general fund. Did I get that right, Sean? Okay. He spent many hours studying this with me, so I knew what I was talking about. The caseload, one more notable thing about the caseload, most of our caseload funding is actually reimbursable to a federal fund, either through CCDF or TANF, and only about 3% of our caseload expenditures are ineligible. For CCDF, about 46%, because they're not serving those most vulnerable, low-income, the most vulnerable TANF-eligible populations, so about 46% is ineligible for TANF reimbursement. So as we look across our caseload amount, we try to maximize the reimbursement to both CCDF and TANF by targeting specific caseload eligible categories to the federal funds that they're eligible for. That was a lot of detail, so hopefully that, again, didn't mess that up. And can talk a little bit about the non-caseload includes most of the programmatic dollars that are not subsidies. So the CFCE, the UPK, the early mental health, Reach Out and Read, Strong Start, all of that falls into the non-caseload as we're looking there. Okay. All right, so for 19 and 20, a couple things. Again, you have a much more detailed chart in the report, but for purposes of presentation, wanted to give the summary chart of how much federal funds and how much general fund that we have claimed over or been appropriated and claimed over the last 5 fiscal years. In general, you can see on both sides, the general fund, the state revenue, and the federal fund are both, there's been increasing appropriations on both sides over the last few years, and particularly in FY18 and FY19. And as we look to FY20, that has been a substantial increase, and that the state increased general revenue far exceeds the federal increase that we've received. This is basically that chart, but I think it makes a good visual to see that our annual expenditures and supports from state and general revenue funds, that our general revenue fund has been increasing, obviously still trumped overall by the federal funds, but specifically you can see the accelerated rate over the last couple of years of state general revenue funds have been accelerated at a quicker pace than the federal increases that we've received. So as we look at where we are, where we have invested those increased dollars, we wanted to point out to you some of, particularly as we look at the federal guidance we got around investing in systems changes, compliance to CCDBG, and the improvements we need to make to our system. You have here in FY19 and our proposed FY20 that we're still in specific discussions around finalizing. The categories of funding that this has gone into. So we can talk, I'm happy to answer questions about specific expenditures within this, but I think that in general what you have is a rate increase, which was obviously money allocated to providers and subsidies for families. So whether through vouchers or through contracts, that is about the rate increase that we received, or that providers received, particularly in the previous 2 years, and proposed for this year, which we are still working on finalizing the implementation of. The systems development included IT supports and all of what you've seen today in terms of building out the capacity to perform compliance-oriented work, and then also provide transparency and all of that. Increased staff, as Felicia pointed out, hiring the additional licensing monitors and BRC level staff contact center that actually helped us make sure that we have the capacity to implement the increased workload that it will be on EEC, and then actually implementing all of that work, minor amount, but really making sure that we have the ongoing supports to maintain compliance and to implement the new regulations with integrity. So that is an overview of the report that we will be providing to ANF to provide to the legislature that outlines this. One note is that there are 2 reporting deadlines, both October 1st, which will be the report that is in front of you for your approval, as well as an additional one in December, where we will give an update to legislature. And so you will see this another version of this in November for your approval. Happy to take questions. May have to defer to the team behind me to help me answer them, or to the secretary who has a little bit more historical context on this.
I just wanted to say, as a longtime observer of the state's commitment to child care, I think the state commitment in recent years is truly extraordinary, and I'm very grateful for it.
It is really wonderful to see the acceleration of state investment and the some of the complexity behind the numbers, because there's always a lot of important choice making that goes on. And so it's good, I think, to have some degree of transparency around it. I do think, though, that we have to look at this in the context of really thinking about the fact that this agency remains extremely underfunded relative to its mandate. And one of the things that I think might be helpful to see in a future report, which apparently has to come to this board for approval, even though it's generated by A&F, which is a little bit of an unusual arrangement, right? Because we don't have an opportunity to look behind the numbers or to ask questions of folks who are generating the numbers. But, you know, I think for me, the real question is, you know, A, what was the intent of the increase in federal funding? My understanding is that it was specifically directed to enable states to address the very significant increased requirements attendant to CCDBG reauthorization, and that a very significant portion of that responsibility really does rest at the agency level. I mean, we've seen just tips of the iceberg in terms of the amount of capacity and time and systems and challenge that's been involved in reaching compliance, right? And at the same time, thinking about, you know, the needs of the field, but also the CCDBG related compliance of the field. My understanding is that that is primarily to take 12 modules on health and safety and to issue an emergency plan. And so when we look at this, one question I have is really about allocation, because we have, you know, roughly 70% of this CCDF increment flowing to the field under rates, while, you know, generously speaking, you could say 30% is flowing to the agency, but that doesn't necessarily reflect the burden of responsibility attendant to CCDF. So I just wonder a little bit about the intent of those federal dollars and how that relates to agency capacity. I mean, a parsimonious reading of these numbers suggests that EEC has had to come into compliance with CCDBG with roughly $3.6 million. If we count FY20, which we're just beginning, then you're up around 11 million or 11 and change. But to really think about how we're allocating funds that the feds seem to have sent to the state specifically for the purpose of coming into compliance with CCDF. And then I think there's also a question, it would be, I think, helpful to get some understanding of how this also reflects legislative intent at the state level, as the state, for example, chose to invest in increased rates for the workforce, which are important, and there's obviously a level of discretion that's afforded. But it would be helpful to think about intent at the federal level, intent at the state level, and how these decisions align with that intent and ultimately align with service to the agency and its important mission on behalf of children and families, and whether this is getting us to that objective.
Yeah, and I think that this is something certainly we can dig deeper into and think a little bit more in a subsequent report about how we flesh out some of the specifics that we're invested in terms of achieving that intent as well. Please.
So there's a difference between how we draw down federal funds and report back how they were used or how they were applied, and how much we actually spend on this, on these various purposes. So in other words, the funds aren't really earmarked. The funds are, by and large, is fungible, and we're sort of drawing down on multiple sources. So we are spending much more on CCDBG implementation than $3.5 million. We probably haven't had a full accounting of how much we have spent so far, how much we will spend on implementation, but it is significantly more. So anyway, so there's this sort of technical how is the fiscal plumbing managed, and then there's the actual investment that we're making in these different categories, which goes above and beyond what we're seeing on the page.
I appreciate that, and I totally get the fungibility and the sort of level of decision making that has to happen. I think your point, Mr. Secretary, is important and might be something that could be included either in this version of the report or in a subsequent report to put these numbers in context, and I think to speak to those questions that I raised, because I think there is more to say.
So maybe in subsequent reports?
Yes. So I can make my first legislative deadline on time.
I also think actually the full accounting is something we should consider doing as a matter of state leadership vis-a-vis the Fed, which is to say it wouldn't hurt to start to scope this and ask some other states if they're scoping it, in part because the amount of burden administratively is just exorbitant, frankly, in a tight time frame too. So that's another way to think about a value add to some more calculation. Other questions or comments?
Can I also, Charlie, so I want to respond to what you just said as well. I think that there's, Felicia laid out a lot of the improvements that are made now, but that also what is going to be continued investments in infrastructure over the next few years as we bring the remaining types of sites online, as we bring the type of providers online, as we think about integrating other programs that EEC oversees, like residential and placement programs, into the health and safety standards that CCDBG set for us. So I think that the exercise of understanding how the December report might look in terms of an infrastructure, a mapping of investments in infrastructure and compliance related, but also using that as an ongoing conversation point as we continue to grapple with these really complex issues and needs for infrastructure to be able to make our human capital most efficiently allocated is going to be a necessary ongoing conversation for us at the board level.
Well, I also think I agree, and I think the other piece that I'm noticing is that it's one thing to get to compliance on their mandates, but the spirit of their mandates, to get to the spirit of them, is going to take us a whole lot more. In other words, the danger would be to take the foot off the gas in the next year, and yet where are the resources? So, so I think I'm just noticing this sort of like, yeah, we can hit October 1 with the basics as per the mandate and be in compliance, and yet to get to the quality improvement that is in many ways the theory of action is going to take a whole lot more work. So we are all going to have to think like economists more than we'd perhaps like to.
Yes, agreed.
Can we take a vote? Does that sound right? All right, so thank you. I'll make the motion that the Board of Early Education and Care hereby approves, pursuant to Section 92 of Chapter 41 of the Acts of 2019, the report of ANF describing CCDBG expenditures as mandated within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts FY 2020 state budget. Have a second? All in favor? Aye. Abstentions? Opposed? So moved. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Phew. Well, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Want to thank everybody, not the least of whom is sitting in front of us, for a great start to this next round of our meetings together. I should tell you, just to mention to the board, that the Commissioner and I are in the throes of scheduling a fairly extended meeting together to sort of catch up after the first few weeks, and now that this meeting is behind us, also do some planning on the arc of these meetings and potentially a retreat sort of late 2019, early 2020. So I'll certainly follow up and be in touch with that in mind. So thanks again, everybody. Nice to see you all.